Good morning, everyone, and welcome to this Quest DWB webinar. My name is Antonio Gomez with the Illinois Center for Specialized Professional Support at Illinois State University. I will be the moderator and technical support for today's meeting. We invite all attendees to hold all questions until the Q&A portion of the webinar, and once we reach that portion, we will call upon you to unmute yourself. You may also feel free to drop any questions in the chat, and we will address them shortly. In an effort to be as accessible as possible, this webinar will be offering closed captioning, so feel free to turn that on using your Zoom toolbar. We will also be recording today's webinar. And now I will hand it off to Jill Meseke to start the presentation. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Antonio. Good afternoon, everyone. Appreciate you joining us today. We've got Jim Potts with us also, and he'll be available to chime in as needed to address any questions related to IWDS, eligibility, documentation, all his specialty items. So, Jim, thanks for joining us. So, to go ahead and get started, today we have the Quest 1 and Quest 2 grantees on the line on the webinar. And as you know, they're very, very similar, basically. And so we tend to combine these webinars because they really go over the same types of things. Today, we will focus we'll have a little bit more discussion on the Quest 1 grants, but I wanted to point out that with the Quest 1, overall, with the Quest 1 grants, we have 8 grantees. 2 of those Quest 1 grantees do not have a Quest 2 grant. So they'll be wrapping up when the grant ends. Some of the grantees that also have a Quest 2 grant are, they're going to continue with the Quest 2 grant. And some of those active participants will be co-enrolled in the Quest 2 grants in some cases. I did want to point out that some grantees, the Quest 1 grantees, are already closing out their grant. They've spent all of their money, and we're starting to see those closed out. So let me start with the agenda and the performance. I wanted to talk about that in terms of enrollments and expenditures. And in particular, what's going on with that. With the Quest, both grants are doing great. The Quest 1 grant, everybody has met their enrollment goals. The expenditures, we still have 5 months or so to go to spend the funds. So everybody's doing great with that one. And the Quest 2 grant, we only started that basically, I think, it was an October 1 award date. So most of the LWIAs have already met or exceeded their enrollment goals already. There's a couple that haven't met or exceeded their goals, but that's understandable. We're only into the second quarter of the grant. So you're doing great with the Quest 2 grant. So moving on to the next topic, the Quest 1 grant is being monitored by DOL. It's tentatively set for August, but it's not confirmed, it's not finalized, but I did want to make you aware of that. So we're going to be requesting project information from you in the next month or so as DOL sends us the announcement letter and requests information from us. So just be prepared. We'll be requesting your Quest 1 project information to assist us with monitoring. And also with that, I am going to be sending out an email requesting your Quest flyers. As we've talked about every webinar, there is that requirement that if you have a public-facing document, a flyer, a press release, job postings, anything that's public, it is supposed to include that funding disclosure on it. You can refer to past webinars for that, but I'll include it in the email that I sent out. I'm gathering all of those because DOL does request them, and they're expecting to see for your Quest flyers, etc., that you do have that disclosure included. It has been a finding in the past, and I know I've mentioned this, but now's the time again for our next monitoring. So just a reminder to have that on your public-facing documents. Again, I'll follow up with an email, and so you can send those to me at that time. So moving on to the next topic, it's DOL grant modification. We have decided that we are going to request a grant extension for the Quest 1 grant that's scheduled to end September 30th. We have a IDS is doing an evaluation for us. And because that they look at participants and exiters, and they look at 2 quarters after exit, 4 quarters after exit, it's important that we have additional quarters to help us do the analysis. So we are putting together a modification request. It'll be formally submitted, I hope, sometime in June. And we would expect to hear something in August. We'll provide you updates on that, but I don't expect really, once we get it formally submitted, don't expect to hear anything until August. DOL has stressed to us, they've emphasized that there's no guarantee it's going to be extended. They have explained that the national office is getting more particular about the extension requests, and they don't approve them all. So we're moving forward with the Quest 1 grant. All of you plan to expend all of your money by June 30th. And that's the information, we're already starting to provide information to DOL. So we've used some of the information you provided us in terms of projections for participants, expenditures. We've already providing that information to DOL. We've got one grantee, extremely large, that will need to have an extension. But the thinking is that all of the funds will be extended by September 30th when the grant ends. Although we'll give you guidance when we hear from DOL. We've got 2 grantees that do not have a Quest 2 grant, and so it might make sense for them to continue to extend the grant and continue providing services under that grant. You're not going to have everyone exited. You're going to have some open activity, open training, etc. So we can talk to all of you about that when it's time. So keep that in mind, that in August, possibly, we'll be having a discussion about extending grants. And at that time, too, we can talk about realigning budgets. Some of you are ready to spend all of your funds, but you need to move the funds around a little bit. For example, you might need more in training and maybe less in supportive services or less in program staff costs. So stay in touch and let me know what your thoughts are about that. But that'll be a time when we can look at realigning the budgets to move the funds to where you need them. Okay, so again, I just wanted to stress that DOL is emphasizing, there's no guarantee that the extension is going to be approved. So proceed as if, you have a 9/30 end date. My next topic was about the budget realignment. That goes for both grants. The Quest 2 also, if whatever grant you're holding, if you realize that you have excess funds in a particular budget line and you want to move funds around, then get in touch with me to let me know that. Put that in your monthly report, first of all. In the comments section, explain that, what you're thinking is what you're wanting to do. And then send me an email also to let me know what your thoughts are about a budget realignment. And we can get started on that process. But again, that's Quest 1 and Quest 2. So the 5th topic is the Quest 1 wrap up with a grant that ends 9/30. As I said, we're going to be providing guidance once we determine what's going to be happening with the DOL request to extend the grant 1 year. Are we definitely ending September 30th, or do some LWIAs want to and need to extend their grant? One of the questions that has come up deals with, if you close the grant September 30th, what do you do with the required follow-up? You've got to follow up for 12 months after someone obtains unsubsidized employment. So how do you do that if you've got to, by 9/30, end the follow-up service in IWDS? How do you continue with that follow-up service and documenting it? Jim, can I go ahead and have you chime in on that? Because I'm sure you can explain it more clearly. I'm learning a lot as we go through this, but yeah, Jim, if you could help us out with that, I'd appreciate it.
For all the grants that end on 9/30, if the client's not co-enrolled, the system's going to require that the service of follow-up be closed out no later than 9/30. But you could still do follow-up, because the follow-up activities is what matters, the things that go on with the client, and those are documented in the case notes. It's just you won't have the service open. I had a question forwarded to me a downside once the grant's closed is you won't be able to use the reports that Jill had spoke about, or somebody I think from OEA 20 had submitted. If a service is closed, wouldn't be able to utilize it. But this is something where you would just have to track those clients who haven't been co-enrolled, who are only served under the Quest 1 grant. If it closed on 9/30, you have to close that grant or that service. But again, you can still do all the follow-up activities and just record it in the case notes. So does that cover that, Jill?
Yes. Thank you. And I'm going to take a moment at this time to go ahead and open it up. We'll see if we have any questions, and not only on this topic, but some of them earlier, just so we don't get too far down the line here with some questions you might forget. Anyway, so let me check here to see if we have any. I don't see any questions, but does anybody want to raise a question right now?
What happened if you don't have that person co-enrolled and that grant come to an end? Just continue doing the follow-up in a case note. Am I correct? This is Robert. How you doing, Jill?
Good. Now, one thing
Jim.
One thing I also did want to point out that I didn't speak about is, remember, for the dislocated worker title and the DWG, as well as adults, you only provide follow-up for those that have obtained unsubsidized employment. And the follow-up actually begins once they obtain that for 12 months. So it could technically, you could have started follow-up while the client was still enrolled, depending on his or her services and things like that. But back to what Robert's question was, correct, Robert. If they're not co-enrolled, if they've obtained unsubsidized employment and they're in follow-up, you would still have to close that follow-up service at the end of the grant and then record the actions taken, the activities of follow-up in the case notes.
Thank you.
Yep.
Thanks, Robert. Any other questions? Okay, we'll go ahead and move on to, let's see, let me look here. Under agenda item 5, we talked about the follow-up services. LWEA grant extensions if necessary. I've already mentioned that basically we'll determine once we hear from DOL who it makes sense for to extend their grant, and we'll start with you on that process. Okay, so moving on to the agenda item 6, DWG updates. I wanted to let you know that we're preparing a DWG manual, and that will be part of e-policy. So it will be available there, and it will include some attachments. You know, we're trying to have some of these attachments in one place so it's easy to access. But what I do want to explain is that our manual is utilizing DOL's TEGL. The TEGL 1621 is updated DWG program guidance. So we basically took that TEGL and turned it into an Illinois policy. There's not much difference between the two documents. We've inserted a few things here and there that are specific or that we wanted to emphasize with Illinois activities and services. Excuse me. One thing is the disaster recovery eligibility. As you know, because this grant is a disaster grant, there's expanded eligibility. So that's one area where it varies from DOL's policy letter, is that we've included Illinois' participant eligibility and definitions. So I just wanted to make you aware of that. I don't know when it's going to be finalized, maybe by the end of the month, but I wanted to make you aware that there is an Illinois DWG manual that we'll have. And then I've got status of DOL DWG new funding announcement. Typically at this time of year, if it's June, July, maybe early August, DOL has announced another round of funding for DWG grants. Last year it was Quest, the year before it was Quest. Before that, I think it was Career DWG. That was not a disaster grant. These most two recent ones have been. We haven't heard anything yet about available funding. If DOL is going to put out any funding, they might not. They always have to evaluate what their reserve status is, and do they have funds to put out a funding announcement. So we're watching that. And like I said, it generally comes this time of year. I would say June or July. Have no idea what it would be. Would it be a disaster grant or not? Because disaster grants, disaster DWG has the expanded eligibility. So we'll keep you informed of that, and we'll be watching for it. But I did want to make you aware that at this time we haven't heard anything, but we'll let you know if we do. And then moving on to item 7, the Quest DWG reminders. We tend to talk about these, I think, basically every webinar, but they are important. And as you continue to, work with your staff, train your staff, operate your projects, it's something to keep in mind. So the first one is critical in that your DWG grants, whatever type they are to align with, match up to 1D policy, state and local. So with the DWG grants, if it's what I have here listed, exit policy, follow-up, training, OJT, paid work experience, supportive services, case management, everything about your 1D program, these Quest grants and any DWG grant is to be operated consistent with that, how you do that. The only difference is eligibility, participant eligibility, because we can use the expanded eligibility for this disaster grant. And then the other thing is also with the disaster grant, there's disaster relief employment. Your 1D program does not have that. So again, just a reminder that as you proceed and develop plans, offer participant services, the DWG grants need to be designed and services delivered consistent with your 1D program, state and local policies. Moving on to the next item in the agenda, I've got a reminder that all Quest participants, both Quest 1 and Quest 2, do need to be part of the underserved and historically marginalized population. And you need to case note that. We've left it up to each LWIA to determine locally what the needs are, who the underserved populations are. As you know, it's very broad in terms of who is part of that underserved and historically marginalized community. And that's generally who you're serving. We were to look at your 1D, for example, that's lines up very well. But my point is, you do need to make a point of, as you go through eligibility, looking at that, identifying what their characteristics are that make them a part of the underserved and historically marginalized communities, and then case note that. Have a case note that talks about eligibility. How are they eligible for this grant? Moving on, case notes, just a reminder, strong comprehensive case notes. Again, tell the participant's story in terms of eligibility, assessment, service determination, documented informed training decision, IEP development, supportive service needs, and update it periodically, especially with the IEP and the supportive services. Those case notes are very helpful to show, that you're periodically updating that, looking at that. Okay, the next item, Quest public facing documents that have the required funding disclosure. So I brought that up earlier because we're being monitored, and so I'm going to be collecting all of that, asking all of you to send me your flyers. But it is something to just be aware of, that with these DWG grants, you do need to have that public disclosure. So as you're doing it, your staff's putting things together, whoever's putting things together, just make sure that that disclosure is included. Co-enrollment. I've explained, or just a reminder, that participants are included in local performance for any of these grants, any of these titles that they're enrolled in. So if, for example, you have a Quest participant, a 1N, who's also an adult, a 1A participant, you've got them co-enrolled, or even a 1Y, a youth participant, you've got them co-enrolled. they're going to be in performance for both. So again, a participant who's 1N and 1A, they'll be in performance for both. And as far as co-enrollment, we've talked about this before, but again, a reminder that you can co-enroll someone, a Quest participant, a DWG participant in general, if there's a reason for it, a benefit for the participant or the project, the grant. If that's the case, then you can enroll them in multiple grants, but there does need to be a reason for it. Otherwise, if we could be overstating our impact on participant enrollment. If you've got somebody, if you've got people in 1D who are getting services from that, and the only thing that they're getting out of 1N is career planning, for example, just case management, that, would be an indication that we're overstating how many people we're serving, because basically they're being served out of the other grant, the formula grant. That's where their training is, or their OJT or work experience supportive services. That's where all the activity is being provided. And the only thing in the 1N is career planning, for example. We're overstating our enrollment. So just watch for that. And yes, you can co-enroll. That would be an important case note in terms of what you're doing and why. What makes sense is that you've got the funding available. This funding is available to supplement your activities. So it makes perfect sense, but just be aware of that and watch for it in terms of co-enrollment, and that it is a necessary thing to do, that there's a benefit or a reason for it.
Jill?
Yeah, Jim?
Input on co-enrollment. Just want to make sure everybody understands, if you do co-enroll with multiple grants, titles, especially titles, you cannot exit from one title till you're finished served in all titles. So we get a lot of questions about that when co-enroll. So if you have a youth that's co-enrolled in this program, you can only exit after they're done with all services and all titles. Same with the adult. So I want to keep that in mind.
Yeah, good point. Thank you, Jim.
Good.
Okay, and then continuity of services is on the agenda, and that's just something, it's in your monthly report, and we ask you to keep that in mind, but it's something that continuity of services is important, because this is a disaster grant. The Quest grants are disaster grants, so that means we've got the alternative employment, alternative criteria for eligibility. Someone does not have to be a dislocated worker to be eligible for this DWG grant, the Quest grants. They can meet the other criteria, which is quite broad. And to give you an idea, we have a significant amount of people enrolled in the Quest grants that are not dislocated workers. I haven't looked at the numbers recently, but it could be that 1/3 of the participants in our Quest grants are dislocated workers. 2/3 aren't. They meet that alternative criteria. So the question is, and that we always want you to be aware of, with those participants that you've enrolled who are enrolled under the alternative criteria, what are you going to do with them when the grant ends and they're still active? They're still working towards meeting their IEP goals in terms of education and employment. What are you going to do with them, since you can't put them, at least based on the initial eligibility, they're not eligible for 1D. Now, some people have gone ahead and made them eligible for the other titles. They might have made them eligible at the time, because at the time they did this eligibility, maybe they were also eligible as an adult. Or maybe at that time they were eligible as a youth. So some people went ahead and did the eligibility determination on those other titles. They're not using it at this point. They haven't enrolled anyone. They've enrolled someone in the Quest grant using the alternative criteria. They made them eligible also as an adult, but as they've enrolled this person in services, it's been all 1N services. They haven't used the 1A. Or they haven't used the 1Y eligibility determination. It's just sitting there in a sense. It's showing up on the eligibility screen, but they're only providing 1N services at this point. So in talking about continuity of services, in that case, the grant ends, let's say it does end September 30th. Some of those LWIAs who have done that would have, and Jim, jump in if I'm not explaining this right, but some of those LWIAs then, if they want to continue, let's say they've got 10 participants that are still active at 9:30 when the grant ends, and it turns out they've already done the eligibility determination, all of those 10 still active are also have already been determined 1A eligible. They can then shift the continued services. You know, the next time a service training, for example, or supportive service is needed, it could be under that 1A. So that provides the continuity of services in that way. Does that make sense, Jim?
Well, I do want to point out that while we're speaking that co-enrollment and something I should have probably spoke a second ago, is it's really important also to understand, especially if you go with 1Y as well as the 1N, is you have to have the ISS in conjunction with the IEP. So you're going to have the individual service strategy, and that needs to be coordinated, meaning we should have the same, if not similar, goal. And then the objective should be coordinated, and then it should break out who's paying for which services underneath those ISS and IEP. And then it would be the same if you're co-enroll under the adult title. You'd want to make sure that it's clear. It'd have the same overall goal, hopefully, same objectives, but you'd want to break out which grants are paying for what. And if you're going to do what Jill had spoke about, is kind of wait till the grant's towards the end and see if you need to continue on services, then use that title. You just want to make sure that you have your ISS or IEPs updated and accurate, because that's something I know a monitor is going to look at. They're going to look at each of if they're co-enrolled, they're going to look at each of the plans and see if they're coordinated. So that's a really important detail. And as far as eligibility for the application, once a client has an application in, he or she is eligible under all the criteria under that application. So even if they had not certified as an adult yet, more than likely all these clients are going to be 18 or older, compliant with selective service. So at a minimum, they would be eligible under adult career services. And then if they're either low income or basic skills deficient or both, they would meet the priorities. So a lot of them would qualify under the adult title. But again, make sure your plans are good and tight and show coordination of which grants are funding what services.
Okay, thanks, Jim, for explaining that further. I appreciate that. So the other, continuity of services is something we want to make sure. We do not want to leave a participant without continued services when the grant ends. We need to have some kind of strategy for continuing to work on their IEP, the goals and objectives, and continued trainings, whatever services that's needed in terms of them working towards finding employment. So that was just a reminder, keep that in mind. So at this point, I want to open it up to
I think we have Christy's hand up.
Okay.
Christy Chevalier, I see her hands up.
Oh, yeah.
Hi, thank you, Jim. Hi, Jill. This is Christy. I'm with LWIA 7. I'm attending on behalf of Patty, Pilar, and Amy. So if there's any I'm here note taking, and I know you've been working with them on the grant. So if there's something you want to tell LWIA 7, you could tell us and I'll pass the message on. But I did have a quick question. My question was kind of for both you and Jim. So I just heard you, Jim, say that if somebody has basic skills or they meet the priority for the, one of the, the second priority.
Low income.
Right. So if we're doing that for some people when they're phasing out of the Quest 1, let's say, would we be using the eligibility date of the grant end? Like if we're phasing out September 30th, would October 1 be the eligibility date for the 1A, or should we leave it the original date?
Yeah, you can do it anytime because it's going to pick up the eligibility because once it's in there, it's a certified application already. So if a client has an app in, if he or she's qualified under any title, it stays eligible that whole time. So you don't fall into that same criteria of you have to do it within 30 days, you know, of the application date of eligibility. So they're going to be eligible as long as it's in that original application. That's the key. You know, the
Okay.
basic skills deficient and or low income had to be in that original application before it can be picked up.
Okay, thank you.
Yep.
Thanks, Christy. Thanks, Jim.
Yep.
Any other questions? Okay, well, if not, the things that I'm going to get back to you on is, wait a minute, I'm seeing something here from Dan. Let's see what that is. Send the recording out so we can forward it to those who couldn't attend. Okay. So what I wanted to just remind everybody of is, in terms of some of my next steps, is I'll be sending out an email when we hear from DOL in terms of the monitoring and what they need. I'll be sending an email out letting you know what it is that we need. Before that, I will be sending out an email asking you all to send me your Quest DWG, what is called public facing documents, you know, your flyers, press releases, public job postings. I'll go ahead and be doing that first, then sending out any emails related to what DOL needs for their monitoring. We will be letting you know when we hear from DOL in terms of our grant modification request that we'll be submitting hopefully by the end of the month. We don't expect to hear from DOL then until August. So we'll let you know what's going on with that, and we can provide guidance at that time in terms of next steps for people with the Quest 1 grant and what you need to do in terms of possibly extending your grant. The DWG manual, I'll be back in touch once that is made policy. And of course, Laura would be doing that anyway. Everybody would be getting that as part of what Laura sends out with policy. But I think that summarizes the things that I'm going to be following up on. So I want to take this chance to thank everybody for participating today. And Jim, thanks for jumping in and providing some additional guidance and explaining things. I do appreciate that. And Antonio, thanks for hosting today's webinar. So that does it for today. Thank you very much, everybody. We appreciate it. Take care. Bye.